So I had another interview on like queerness and spirituality coming up, but it got postponed, so I'm just going to share some of my ideas for that. And I'm trying, like, what I'm going for in general is not to be offensive and also not to be defensive, but to present my view as a sort of alternative view and like narrative to understand the phenomena that we can all see, and an alternative like space that is available and that like I have stepped into and maybe others will want to. I was talking a little bit on the Seekers of Unity Discord server, and somebody said something really beautiful that maybe sums up my view of queerness as it relates to like Christianity or like religious tradition. Anyway, they said, I think mysticism itself has a sort of queerness to it, being outside societal and traditional norms, and yet somehow integral to those same societies and traditions. And I think that's part of how I see queerness too, as outside but integral, as a mystical exploration of the nature of true reality, as part of the whole, which cannot be divorced from the divine. It's a profoundly human thing to live inside of a paradox. Going back to technique and magic as always, paradox is the gateway into the magic world, as it were, and sort of the bottom level where it intersects with descriptive language. Anyhow, yeah, to me it's the same kind of thing as mystics, and also like there's a similarity to what monks and nuns do, because that is also definitely a different relationship with eros, with the body, with the idea of fruitfulness, and it can be controversial, and it's definitely a calling for some people and not for others. But as far as like fruitfulness, I mean, like a loving relationship is never barren, right? Because even the church, in the case of like a childless couple, would accept this easily and would say like they bear the fruit of the Spirit and they're still abundant and they're not like defective in some way because they can't have children. And another analogy that, oh goodness, was it somebody brought up in some video that I like is that of like adoptive parents, because being a parent is definitely a biological thing, but we would still recognize adoptive parents as parents and fitting into that category because they're like living the pattern and the spirit of parenthood genuinely. And so, you know, some of the arguments against queer people, it would correspond to something roughly like you're just a glorified, saying to an adoptive parent, like you're just a glorified kidnapper. You can't like choose pridefully yourself which kids you're going to have. You have to settle for the children or the childlessness that you're given by your biology and how you naturally are, or fixating on cases in which it is necessary to distinguish between biological parents and adoptive parents, like in the case of a genetic disorder or something, and kind of fixating on that and trying to use it to dismantle the entire legitimacy of adoptive parents as parents. And similarly, this idea that you are what you are, and you can't create yourself, like stubbornly maybe, but like spirituality, I don't like that word. I don't like the word religion. I don't like the word spirituality. I don't know which word to use. Spirituality or religion is all about like this dialogue with God, right? And sort of softening the boundary, recognizing God within us and discerning the voice of God within, and like softening those boundaries between, you know, the human will as under and opposed to the divine will. Like for somebody, well, for all of us, but especially the more tender and like open, God is sort of the heart of our heart, and definitely in many cases we would all agree that God speaks through our like deepest desires, even if those sometimes don't make sense or go against norms. And I just watched this really beautiful sermon by Chris Green called God is Not a Master. Well, okay, I skimmed, I read the transcript, but he says it's precisely that way of thinking, that God is the master and we're the slave. God gets to do what he wants and we have to live with it and sort of crush our own desires, or our own wants underneath that. That underwrites every evil that Christians have supported. That kind of thinking can be used to like justify almost anything. Going back to the idea of like it's wrong because, or Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, because gender and sex exist like for reproduction and procreation, which definitely has a logic to it, right? Like that is, it makes sense. But to me, to say that gender and love and sex primarily or only exist for procreation is to get into like the technic sort of mindset where we and our identities and our actions and lives are sort of steps and places in this linear series of production, where what we are is sort of slaves to this pragmatic goal, and finally it's just the goal of the endless expansion of this productive series, and like that is the only point of anything, is just to produce more and more and more and more universal paperclips kind of thing. Is that what it's called? That game where they turn the universe into paperclips. Anyhow, I don't see much difference between God designed gender and sex to reproduce, therefore being gay, or I guess you could also probably argue against it for being trans, is wrong, and like the idea that we only feel love because like our DNA wants to reproduce and stuff like that. Like these things have to exist for and in themselves first, independently from any kind of sort of pragmatic or outside or creative like goal. And that sort of beauty maybe, or gratuitousness and just like self-existence and integrity in itself is like that highest telos. And then that lets us discern and affirm the most variety possible underneath it and outward from it, instead of holding on to some lower telos and then getting caught in the system of like Babel and idolatry, basically. And I see a queer person's life as like putting the emphasis very obviously higher up on like a more spiritual level. Like, I don't love and make love to my partner from the need to pass on DNA, but from need and love for them as a person. Or my gender isn't because, well, that's what God or nature has put on me, so I just conform without thinking, but because, as Abigail Thorne said, there was some spark that I found intriguing and that I loved, and over time I realized that spark was recognition. And, I identify with and embrace this to the point of invention, even. And of course, any person, including a cis-het person, with a healthy relationship to their body and to their partner would say the exact same thing. And so in this way, like, that's all it ever is. That's the heart of. So in this way, queer people can be seen as a sort of miracle. And I guess, again, getting back to marginal, eccentric events that are very close to the heart. In the same way as a miracle is not this aberration from the natural order, but it actually highlights the miraculousness and the gratuitousness and like the supernatural source of every aspect of nature, no matter how mundane and mechanical it seems. Like, creating wine from water highlights the equal miracle of creating wine from grapevines and sun and soil. It's all ex nihilo, it's all made out of God. And of course, the body and biology are also from God's creation too. So falling in line with those biological and or traditional patterns, healthy traditional, not the unhealthy ones, obviously, but like living those to your fullest in a unique way, that's also beautiful. Just like fermenting wine, growing wheat, making bread is all good, and in no way does the miracle of making wine from water suddenly put an end to making wine in the ordinary way. So that's why I don't see like cishet, and I don't know what the like non-political term for that would be, so I'm just gonna say cishet, but you know what I mean, or queer people. I don't see them as like threatening each other, but rather complementing each other and sort of highlighting different aspects of creation and what it is to like be human, or just to be. There is this notion of putting the margins in the center, seen in a negative light as like chaos devouring the world. Hold up. Because I was watching a Jonathan Pajot video, and he was, well, like a short bit of one, and he was talking about that. And okay, I guess we could go two directions from this, because I've just thought of this, like, I was talking earlier about like the highest telos, right? And if you have the highest, if you're holding on to what's highest and deepest, then all the different hierarchies and the center and the margins, or the different centers and margins, can live in harmony and coexist. But when you don't have that, what you get is this fighting and this division and reaction and sort of the pendulum swinging one way and the other. So somebody like Pajot is looking at the world now and seeing the margins sweeping in and chaos sort of. I say somebody like because I don't know exactly his perspective, but this seems to be the kind of perspective he's conveying, is the margin sweeping in, chaos sweeping in, and the margins being put in the center in sort of desecration, and the edges becoming the rule and stuff. And it's like, that is a reaction to, of course, the center trying to get hegemony. It's just like the pendulum swinging the other way. So I don't know, there's something that, I guess in light of that, there's something that bothers me about people unilaterally, about people like saying that this is bad, maybe without acknowledging what led to it. I'm still trying to articulate that. But the main thing is, so there's this thing of like when the margins sort of get put in the center, and this creates a sort of disrupts the order of things. and that can certainly be seen as a negative thing that's destructive. But from a different angle, like, God is the circle or the divine milieu, because apparently everyone hates Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, so I'm going to continue to quote him. From a different angle, though, like, God is the circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. So what kind of nuance does that give to our concept of the fullness? Again, not like seen purely in this historical lens of like action and reaction and which side are you on, but of the fullness of the pattern of center and margins. If God is the circle whose center is everywhere, whose circumference is nowhere. And it's funny to me because Christianity is precisely like this movement of doing exactly that and taking the marginal stuff that's offensive and that's condemned and literally putting it in the center and being like, this is the new center. Like a baby, which, as far as I know, babies and children were treated really even less sentimentally back then. Like, they didn't have this, little children thing as much. I think of Jesus literally putting the woman, the Pharisees or whoever it was, put the woman in adultery, in the middle of them to sort of condemn her. And then Jesus almost flips that and puts her in the center in in a way to rebuke everybody else, and then like a literal dying criminal, judged as a criminal by both the legitimate religious tradition and the state. That is the ultimate putting the margins in the very center and disrupting. And like historically, who are queer people but outcasts and criminals in the eyes of the state and in the eyes of the church?